Mike Bryant from First Lutheran Church here for the final installment of our class on Muhammad and the origins of Islam. So in the last class, in our third installment, we talked about the war between the Muslims, that is Muhammad's followers, and the city of Mecca. Mecca, you'll remember, was Muhammad's hometown, and it's also the home of the Kaaba, which was that shrine important not just locally there in Mecca, but indeed through the whole Arabian Peninsula, and that it was the focus of that annual pilgrimage called the Hajj, and that the citizens of Mecca, their whole economic vitality surrounded this period of the Hajj. They ran a fair during this Hajj when people from all over the peninsula would come to pay their respects to that mystical shrine called the Kaaba. And that when Muhammad started preaching monotheism and saying that all the idols inside the Kaaba were false, this really made things uncomfortable for him there in the city of Mecca. He had to flee, took refuge in a town to the north called Yathrib that later was renamed Medina, meaning the city of the prophet, in his honor, and that relations between Muhammad and his followers, the Muslims, and Mecca deteriorated to the point into outright warfare. And where we left off was that the Meccans were completely humiliated in the Battle of the Trench when they attempted to attack and kill Muhammad in Medina. And Muhammad, they had assembled a huge alliance of Bedouin Arab tribes for that purpose, promising these allies great spoils and great glory, and it all came to naught. This shattered Mecca's prestige, and that's where we left off. So what Muhammad and his followers did next was they decided to make the Hajj and go and visit the Kaaba. And of course, this is, going to result in conflict with the Meccans. But the Meccans understand that they can't beat Muhammad at this point, and they sue for peace. So Muhammad and the Meccans come up with a treaty in the year 628, basically which is going to allow the Muslims an opportunity to visit the Kaaba during the Hajj, and that during that period when the Muslims are in the city, the rest of the citizens will vacate. They will leave Mecca to the Muslims so they can pay their respects to the Kaaba, and there won't be any opportunity for bloodshed, in this very acrimonious relationship between the Meccans and the Muslims. So the treaty only lasts 2 years, unfortunately. It was made in 628, and in fact, the terms of the treaty were that it was going to last 10 years and that the Muslims could make the Hajj the following year, right? So the Muslims did make the Hajj the following year. There was no bloodshed. But in 630, 2 years after the treaty was made, things fell apart, and not because of direct conflict between the Muslims and the Meccans, but rather between an ally of the Muslims and an ally of the Meccans. These two third parties, if you will, start fighting, and that leads to recriminations between Mecca and the Muslims. And it really shows that, what a tinderbox this was, that even something removed a full, step from both parties leads to the collapse of this treaty. What probably really had happened was enough time had passed since the Battle of the Trench that the Meccans were starting to feel, emboldened again, and they felt like they did not need to honor the terms of this treaty. So they perhaps were looking for a pretext for breaking the treaty that they had made with the Muslims. For whatever reason, the treaty is broken, and we're on the brink of outright warfare again. So in response to this, Muhammad goes out and makes his own alliance against Mecca, kind of turning the tables, doing exactly what they had done to him a few years earlier. And he raises an army of 10,000 that is preparing to march on Mecca. And it's faced with this specter that the citizens of Mecca realize their error in breaking the treaty with Muhammad, and they again sue for peace and try to restore the treaty, even going so far as the leader of the city of Mecca converting to Islam and accepting, acknowledging that Muhammad is God's messenger, obviously under duress with the prospect of a giant army poised to swoop in and destroy his city. So Muhammad and the Muslims essentially enter the city unopposed and peacefully. There's no bloodshed, but they do take control of Mecca and the Kaaba. And the first thing that they do when they've got control of the Kaaba is that they go inside and they smash all of the idols inside, basically claiming the Kaaba for, Allah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they take very little retribution against the Meccans, except for 10 particularly egregious Meccans who had insulted the Prophet and mocked the new religion. Those 10 are put to death, but everyone else in the city is spared. Within a short period of time, in fact, nearly all of the citizens of Mecca convert to Islam, which is quite remarkable when you think about the level of acrimony and hatred that had characterized the war between the Muslims and Mecca. Remember that at the Battle of Uhud, where the Meccans had defeated the Muslims, that the general's wife had tried to eat the liver of one of the Muslim soldiers who had fallen, and other Muslim soldiers' bodies were desecrated, and their ears and noses were cut off and made into anklets for the Meccans. So now Islam has really become a juggernaut. We've seen them defeat this great alliance arrayed against them in Medina, and now taking over the city of Mecca and the Kaaba. And now Muhammad and his followers and his allies turn toward the conquest of the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. And they basically vanquish all of the tribes who had allied themselves with Mecca and hadn't already come into the fold, so to speak. So through military conquest, they're able to basically make all of Arabia friendly to Islam. Now, nobody is forced to convert. Those pagan tribes that remain pagan, or those individuals who remain pagan, are allowed to do so, but they are required to pay a tax called the zakat, okay? And they are required to leave the Muslims alone. So there's protection for the Muslims. It's on one of these campaigns that we encounter kind of a funny story, but one that really has huge implications for the future of Islam, and particularly the split that Islam is going to endure after Muhammad's death, the split into Sunni and Shia. So remember that Muhammad's first adult male follower was his uncle, was a man named Abu Bakr. And we learned that Abu Bakr, that was not his real name. That literally just means father of the virgin. And the virgin in question was Muhammad's favorite wife, Aisha, who was a very young girl when she and Muhammad were wed. She has become Muhammad's favorite wife. And so on one of these campaigns, right, Aisha accompanies Muhammad and the whole army, okay? And what happens is that the army, takes a rest, and, Aisha's camel sits down, and the army's getting ready to head back out again. And Aisha says, wait, stop, we can't go. I have lost my favorite necklace. And Muhammad orders the column to stop, and everybody is sent searching around the campsite for Aisha's necklace. And they search and they search, and the day is starting to wane away, and they can't find it. People are obviously starting to roll their eyes at this whole episode. Finally, they decide to give up, and Aisha's camel gets up, and the camel has been sitting on the necklace. So they find the necklace, and they ride off. Well, a couple days later on this same campaign, same thing happens. Okay, Aisha loses her necklace, and she realizes she can't put Muhammad through the same embarrassment that she did before. She remembers going off into the brush to, relieve herself, and so she decides to just quietly go off and look for that spot. That's probably where the necklace got lost. She'll find it. She'll return to the caravan. No harm done. Well, she does that. She spends a long time looking for the necklace until she can't find it, and then decides to return to the caravan, gets there, and lo and behold, the whole army has moved off without her. Nobody noticed that Aisha wasn't there, and they've set off. So now she's lost in the wilderness and is really starting to panic. Well, it so happens that a Muslim soldier encounters her and brings her back into the army. Now, when she arrives, in the company of this single man, right, this raises a lot of eyebrows among everybody. This is very scandalous for the prophet's wife to have been off, with this other man, alone together. So things are not good for Aisha. This episode really starts to get tongues wagging among the army and among Muhammad's followers. And the instigator of a lot of the negative talk is Muhammad's nephew, Ali, who also happens to be his son-in-law. Muhammad has married his oldest daughter, Fatima, to Ali and bound him even closer, right? So remember, we've got this dynamic where Ali was the first male follower, but he was a child, and Abu Bakr, Aisha's father, was the first adult male follower. And if you remember from our second episode, it was those two who had basically helped Muhammad during the flight from Mecca to Medina. Ali had put on Muhammad's cloak, and he had stayed behind as the decoy, right? An act of great bravery, right? Because he knew people were coming to assassinate Muhammad, while Abu Bakr was Muhammad's companion on the flight. He was the sole companion when Muhammad made his way from Mecca to Yathrib or Medina, okay? So it's Ali who raises the specter and basically broaches the subject with Muhammad that your wife has dishonored you, you need to divorce her. What she has done has blackened your reputation. Muhammad loves Aisha too much to divorce her and doesn't heed Ali's words. And basically what we're left with is a bitter rivalry now between Aisha and her father Abu Bakr and Ali. All right, so we're coming toward the end of Muhammad's life. Let's talk a little bit about how he conducted himself, after having gained all of this power and authority. Most of the Arabian Peninsula now has converted to Islam. The few remaining pagans in the peninsula are forced to pay zakat, tax to the Muslims, right? So he is reigning supreme. Even so, even though he has all this power, Muhammad continues to live simply, okay? He mends his own sandals in kind of an ostentatious display of, just how simple of a man he is. And he gives all of his money to the poor. In fact, Muhammad is going to die essentially destitute, okay? Because as soon as money comes in, he gives it right back out to people in need. In what is considered a great virtue among men of that time and era, Muhammad divides his time equally among each of his wives. He doesn't show open favoritism toward any of them in the amount of time he spends, although it's obvious to everyone, that he has a special place in his heart for Aisha, the virgin, okay? And through this all, he remains accessible to the people. He has an open door policy and meets with the lowliest people if they need his advice or counsel. Eventually, Muhammad prophesies his own death. And in doing so, he utters something that is going to be interpreted different ways and caused some confusion, some conflict between his followers in the wake of his death. He says, whoever considers me a Mawla, meaning head of the family, right? Whoever considers me a Mawla, so too is Ali his Mawla. So one way you could construe that is that he's speaking metaphorically and saying that Ali is my chosen successor over the whole Ummah, the whole Muslim community. Or you could interpret it much more narrowly and literally and mean all he's saying is that Ali is the head of the family, and that when I die, Ali becomes the Mawla, the head of the family in my stead. When he finally falls ill, this is when Muhammad kind of puts aside any pretense of equality among his wives, and recognizing that the end is near and that he's only got a few days left to live, he asks to spend those remaining days in Aisha's hut. Okay? He asks her father, Abu Bakr, to lead the Friday prayers, which has been his role as leader of Islam. So he's kind of giving Abu Bakr the nod to be his successor in that respect. Meanwhile, while Abu Bakr is kind of running the Islamic community, running the faith, so to speak, while Muhammad is lying ill, Ali and Aisha are standing vigil. Okay, and that's got to be some tense times when they're together, given how much they hate each other, over that whole episode of the necklace and Ali's suggestion that Muhammad should divorce Aisha. Okay, and then there are two stories about when Muhammad dies, and it kind of depends on which party you fall into, which story you believe. Okay, one version has that Muhammad dies in Aisha's arms. Okay, the other version is that he dies with his head on Ali's shoulder. Right, so you take your picks and you go with it. When word of Muhammad's death gets out, some of his followers simply don't believe it. They believe that Muhammad is the Messiah, that he is immortal, okay? And it's Abu Bakr who has to speak to the crowd and level with them and say, listen, if you worshipped the prophet, if you worshipped Muhammad, the prophet is dead. But if you worshipped God, God will never die. Basically saying that Muhammad was just here for a short time to deliver God's word, but the faith remains beyond him. Okay, so remember that Ali is the Mawla now. He's the head of the household, okay? And one of his responsibilities is to prepare Muhammad's body for burial, which is quite an elaborate ritual at that time. So he's doing that, and while he's tending to his responsibilities, his familial responsibilities, and taking care of Muhammad's remains, the leaders of the Muslims are convening to elect a successor to Muhammad, okay? And it breaks up into a couple of factions, and it's Abu Bakr who intercedes and pleads for unity. So he nominates a couple of what he considers to be, compromise candidates, people who could unify the community in the way Muhammad did, and others recognizing his wisdom and his ability to keep the peace, they nominate Abu Bakr. And in fact, Abu Bakr is elected to be the caliph, that is the successor of Muhammad. And he's got a lot to recommend him, right? He's got this reputation for wisdom. Muhammad had always relied on him as his solid counselor from day one. He had been a pillar of the fledgling community. He was Muhammad's first adult male supporter and really was kind of the financial rock for that early church that Muhammad was building. He was the prophet's companion when the prophet fled Mecca, the Hijra, okay? He was the sole companion. And very recently, he was the guy that the prophet had chosen to lead the prayers in his absence. Did not the prophet in that way nominate Abu Bakr to be the leader of the faith when he died? So after he's elected caliph, successor to Muhammad, Abu Bakr claims as part of the job, basically, all of the lands that belonged to Muhammad, on the theory that Muhammad had not treated those as, so much a personal asset as an asset for the church. Remember that Muhammad used all of his income to give to the poor. And so Abu Bakr is making the case that this patrimony, these lands that Muhammad owned, really were for the purpose of the ummah, the community, and that they rightly belong under the control of the leader of that community, the caliph. The problem is that Muhammad's heir is his daughter Fatima. And remember, Fatima is married to Ali, okay? And Ali is quickly becoming arch rival to Abu Bakr. He's already arch rival to Aisha, Abu Bakr's daughter. And as we're going to see, the rift is coming to encompass Abu Bakr also. So Ali and his supporters, for their part, refused to recognize as legitimate the election of Abu Bakr. And they've got a point, right? Because this all went down while Ali was there doing his familial duty to take care of Muhammad's body, and therefore he was not given a voice in this whole succession thing. And he could rightly claim to be kind of Muhammad's staunchest follower. He was the strong man, the strong young man that Muhammad had always leaned on, where Abu Bakr was the wise older man that Muhammad had leaned on. He was the fire to Abu Bakr's ice. Okay, so the fact that while he was doing his familial duty and taking care of Muhammad's remains, these people got together and put Abu Bakr in the position of leadership really sticks in Ali's craw and sounds like kind of an underhanded coup d'etat. So he and Fatima retreat to their house and refuse to come out, refuse to pay homage to Abu Bakr. So when this happens, Abu Bakr realizes that if he wants to prevent a rift in the community and be dealing with, an insurgency forever, he needs to take a stand and bring these rebels to heel, so to speak. So he goes to the house of Ali and Fatima and demands that Ali come out and pay him homage as the caliph and recognize his authority. Ali and Fatima refuse to come out, and the situation becomes so tense that one of Abu Bakr's followers, a guy named Omar, who will later become caliph himself, actually threatens to burn down their house. And this is when Fatima does something that to us sounds really, strange that she would do this, but apparently it was a big deal back then. She comes out and threatens to uncover her hair, okay, take off her head covering and expose her hair, which is tantamount to saying, you're raping me. Okay, I'm exposing myself to the world because you're forcing me to, and you're essentially raping me. And this is dramatic enough that Abu Bakr actually withdraws, and we are left with this standoff between Abu Bakr, the caliph, and Ali. What finally ends the impasse is that Fatima dies unexpectedly. And this kind of gives Ali an opportunity to submit, honorably, right? Because the heir has died and he really has no direct claim to Muhammad's property, okay? He does so, as he claims, for the unity of the community, but at the same time, he says, I still believe that I have a superior right to be the caliph. Nevertheless, I'm submitting to your authority, Abu Bakr, for the good of the community. He also points out that his sons, he and Fatima had two sons, Hassan and Hussein, and that these two boys are the only blood descendants of Muhammad, and that they are the real living descendants, the real living heirs of the Prophet. Nevertheless, Ali recognizes that he's beaten and he withdraws from politics. So this rift, this rivalry between Abu Bakr and Ali is the foundation of the rift that still exists in Islam today between Sunni and Shia. Okay? The Sunnis believe that Abu Bakr is the legitimate successor to the Prophet. The Shiites deny this, and they believe that Ali and that Muhammad's grandsons Hassan and Hussein and their descendants are the only legitimate successors to the Prophet. Okay. Now, there's a little bit more to the story that unfortunately in this format we don't have time to get into. Ali will eventually become caliph. He'll be killed in office, and Muhammad's grandsons, Hassan and Hussein, will be martyred for the cause of trying to maintain the legitimate line of succession. Nevertheless, you kind of understand now the origins of the split between Sunni and Shia that persists to this day, and it really comes down to nothing more than this very early division over the rightful succession to Muhammad's office. I hope you have enjoyed this class. I've enjoyed putting it on for you, and I encourage you to leave some comments on the YouTube page if you enjoyed the class, or if there's something that you think that I could do better or that you wish I would have covered. I would enjoy seeing those comments in the form of feedback. Until I teach again, I thank you for the opportunity to do this. I had fun with it. I look forward to speaking in front of you in person, hopefully in the near future, and enjoy the rest of your summer. God bless.